It's time for Paleo Radio, only on Secular Media Network.
You are now entering Paleo Radio.
Welcome to Paleo Radio with your hosts Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder.
Welcome to Paleo Radio here live in studio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM Public Reality Radio. As always, the phone number here, 616-656-1680. Again, my name is Joe Elder. We have a great lineup of topics for you guys today. First segment is going to be obviously what's been going on and everybody has been talking about on social media and the news. The recent shootings of Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, as well as the Dallas shooting that took place midweek of this week. It was pretty absolute tragedy, and how we're going to respond to that. Second segment we're going to get into is Hillary Clinton. The FBI probe has been closed, but a new state probe has now been opened. We're going to get into some deeper details with Hillary Clinton's emails and some dirty deeds that were done dirt cheap behind the scenes that a lot of people found out about. Third segment at 2:30, Jeremiah Bannister, the co-host of Paleo Radio, is going to be calling in and giving us an update on his daughter, Samantha, and the hashtag Team Tiny Dancer whole process that's going on. Give us an update. Let us know how she's doing, how she's feeling. And if anyone doesn't know about that, Sammy has a form of brain cancer, and they are across state right now having discussions with some of the best doctors in the state of Michigan and in the United States about what they can do to help her. And finally, we're going to finish with a little bit of lightheartedness because Ken Ham's non-floating, non-factual ARC exhibit opened, and we get to delve into some of that. But first, we're going to go back to Louisiana to begin all things. Alton Sterling was selling CDs in front of his local convenience store when Sterling, he was armed, but he was already on the ground when two officers were on top of him. Days after that event occurred, there was videos of this event. Everybody saw it, shared it. It was an absolute atrocity. People could see what happened. There was multiple things that had occurred, multiple opinions about the topic, but end all be all is that Alton Sterling was shot on the ground. There's a Department of Justice investigation that was launched Wednesday of this week to look into that. Very quickly following that was the shooting and I would say murder of Philando Castile, who is a legal gun owner in Minnesota. He had no record, was very active in the community. He was shot reaching for his identification after acknowledging to the officer that he had a weapon and a permit. The first clip that I have is our Minnesota's governor, Mark Dayton. He responds in a way that I don't think any governor has ever responded to a shooting in his state. So I wanted to commend him for that. That's going to be our first clip. We can roll that right now.
Nobody should be shot and killed in Minnesota for a traffic tail light being out of function. Nobody should be shot and killed while they're seated still in their car without a very, very different kind of response. So I'm heartbroken for Minnesota because I've heard in the last few hours from very distinguished African American men and women who have recounted to me how they've been pulled over, singled out, and treated very differently because of their race from how white Minnesotans expect to be covered. Would this have happened if those passengers, the driver and the passenger, were white? I don't think it would have. So I'm forced to confront, and I think all of us in Minnesota are forced to confront, that this kind of racism exists, and that it's incumbent upon all of us to vow that we're going to do whatever we can to see that it doesn't happen, it doesn't continue to happen.
So again, that was Mark Dayton, the governor of Minnesota, responding to the death of Philando Castile in his home state and his response to it. Some quick thoughts on it. First, yes, race absolutely has something to do with it. And before we can begin to construct some argument about how we can solve these problems, we all have to come to an agreement of what the problems are. And this is why I wanted to commend Governor Dayton, because he comes out and he says, yes, this type of racism exists. It's something we have to deal with. If we begin this process from the notion that everybody is equal in the first place, then we're failing to understand the reasons why things like Black Lives Matter is such a movement, or we're failing to understand the reasons why people are so upset and there's so much civil unrest. We're not equating to the fact that this sort of racism is built into some of the systemic problems that we see with not only police, but in our government, in our realty sections, when people didn't give housing to certain people of certain races. It's something that is well built into our democracy. And the thing is, for me, it didn't start with police either. It didn't start with police, and it's not going to end with police either. Once this is squashed and we've moved on, it's not only police. So we can't think about them as the end-all be-all. There's so many things we as a society can correct for ourselves before we can go blaming one sole group for things. And it's the same way with how people feel or how they look at the black community, where they'll say things like the black community isn't strong and the black community can't be strong because they hurt themselves. Well, that type of rhetoric and that type of thinking is the same as being on the thin blue line, or we basically can't be so segregated in our thought that we're not willing to talk to each other and make something work. My biggest concern is that we can fall into a vicious cycle where you can have rampant vigilantism like we saw in Dallas, and this is going to be circulatory. We could possibly see retaliations all the time like this, and that's why I think we need to talk about how we seriously correct these problems. The number one thing we can do is, like Mark Dayton did, say that racism exists. This is what we have to deal with as a society, inside and outside of the police and inside and outside of our society. What are we going to do about it? The next clip that I have is of President Obama just responding to the tragedy that happened in Dallas, where it absolute horror. We had, I'm looking through my topics here. We had 5 police officers that were fatally shot, 7 others wounded Thursday when a sniper opened fire in downtown Dallas during a protest over the recent shootings in Minnesota and Louisiana. Here's President Obama responding to that.
As I told Mayor Rawlings, I believe that I speak for every single American when I say that we are horrified over these events and that we stand united with the people and the police department in Dallas. According to police, there are multiple suspects. We will learn more, undoubtedly, about their twisted motivations. But let's be clear, there is no possible justification for these kinds of attacks or any violence against law enforcement.
So again, President Obama responding to Dallas, what happened in there. And that also is just a little bit of a factual statement of what Obama said, in case anyone goes off to say that he didn't support police or he said something in a way that incited people towards violence of the police. There's Obama saying there's no situation whatsoever where we should be violent to police, which I absolutely concur with. You know, I don't agree that black people should be predominantly looked at differently by the police and treated differently and treated in a negative way. I don't think that black people should be shot in a high number by police. I don't believe that police should be shot in any way by the citizenry. I don't think any of this is productive towards a better American society. But overall, going back to it, where do we go from here? And how do we stop this from becoming a vicious cycle and retaliation against ourselves? Because on both sides, we need to come together and work towards these solutions. And we're not all in it. And we are all in it, really, whether we want to be or not, because bystanders still get counted in this equation. And if you guys have anything to say or comment, please call in 616-656-1680. It's one of those things where we can get into the game of who started it, I'm going to finish it sort of thing. We can get into the game of, well, the racism has been so persistent that that's why we've finally seen this, and the top is going to pop eventually. And for me, that's a way of justifying the actions that I don't believe are ever correct. The same way that when I see videos of police acting in a way that they shouldn't, I outwardly say that is not correct. You just can't split hairs in a way where you justify the violence. You can talk about frustration. You can talk about things you want to do to solve these issues. You can talk about a plethora of things, of ways of discussing the events. But to justify any sort of attack on law enforcement or any sort of attack on our citizenry is albeit the same to me. In a way, it's kind of like two cities that are very small next to each other that think they're very, very different, when in all reality the way they think is very, very much the same. Because if the police are looking at this, or the people supporting the police look at this as all we need to do is get citizens to treat police better, and then we're solved of this problem. And then you have people on the other side that are saying all we need to do is get police to treat us better, and we've solved this problem. I'd say these are symptomatic problems of the fact that we're a 200-year-old country that was based upon a slave trade, and it's a big reason why we got to the industrial age in the way that in which we did. So it's the long game that I'm playing, and I'm worried about dissolution of society. I'm worried about people falling apart in ways where you have police that are scared to walk up to anybody. They're scared to make any sort of even a traffic stop becomes violent because they're worried about people pulling their guns now in the cars. That sort of thing has always been persistent. Like, we have to think about it from the perspective of everybody. It's absolutely wrong to be a citizen that has your permit and tells the officer, yes, I have a permit, I'm reaching for it, and your life is ended. That's an abhorrent thing. It's also, you have to think about being the police officer that walks up to vehicles, and not in the situation of the gentleman there in Minnesota, but of other situations where you're walking up to vehicles and you don't know what's in the car, and you have to deal with that situation. And we do need training, and we do need more work there. But it's not just police, everybody, and it's not just certain sects of our society. It's everyone. And like I said, the bystanders will be counted. If you're going to sit by and watch this idly and have no opinion on it, you still are part of this equation. You're still a huge amount of people that, in a way, have given tacit approval to the status quo. And the status quo is pretty rough. It's pretty rough right now. I have a clip here of Martin Luther King talking about violence and violence begetting violence, basically, and the reasons why you can't use violence in a retaliatory sense because it doesn't really get you anywhere. We can roll that clip right now, please.
Well, I think these brutal methods used by the Birmingham police force and other police forces will naturally arouse the eye of Negroes, and I think there is the danger that some will be so aroused that they will retaliate with violence. I think, though, that we can be sure that the vast majority of Negroes who engage in the demonstrations and who understand the nonviolent philosophy will be able to face dogs and all of the other brutal methods that are used without retaliating with violence, because they understand that one of the first principles of nonviolence is a willingness to be the recipient of violence while never inflicting violence upon another. And none of the demonstrators in Birmingham engaged in aggressive or retaliatory violence. It was always someone on the sideline who had never been in the demonstrations and probably not in the mass meetings and had never been in a nonviolent workshop. So I think it will depend on the extent to which we can extend the teaching of the philosophy of nonviolence to the larger community rather than those who are engaged in the demonstrations.
And I think MLK says it better than anyone else. How do we functionally do this? Talking about nonviolent workshops, sit-ins, ways of showing your disdain or showing your want for a need or wanting a change in the status quo, and how do you get it without using violent means? It's extremely important. Stick around, guys. Next topic, Hillary Clinton.
Join the club. Support our work by visiting patreon.com/Paleo Radio today.
Back to Eagle and Dragon.
We want to give a special shout out to my good friend Jim Gerner for following us on Paleo Radio. That is Paleo Radio Show on Twitter, also on Facebook. We keep everybody updated. We've got all the social media memes, all the goodies over there. So please follow us or like us on Facebook and Twitter. And again, shout out to J-Bone. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for following the Paleo Crap movement. All right, we're going to get into a Washington Post article, Clinton's Deplorable Disregard for Proper Security. This is by Colbert King. A May State Department Inspector General's report on emails recorded in management of cybersecurity during Clinton's tenure said, Two staff in Clinton's executive secretariat reported in late 2010 that they discussed their concerns about Secretary Clinton's use of personal email accounts in separate meetings with the director of executive secretariats. According to one staff member, the director stated that the secretary's personal system had been reviewed and approved by the department's legal staff and that the matter was not to be discussed any further. The Office of the Inspector General, quote, found no evidence that the Office of the Legal Advisor reviewed or approved Secretary Clinton's personal system. The OIG also reported that the other staff member who raised concerns said that the director stated that the executive secretariat's mission is to support the secretary and instructed the staff to never speak of the secretary's personal email system again. So basically, to recap that, people in her own tent thought something was shady. People in her own tent thought something was going on where they've already addressed it to somebody, and they basically get told, our job is to support her, not to question her. Never speak of this again. So welcome to authoritarian rule, folks. But obviously it shows that people were so aware of the potential risk that they addressed their superiors on it. So we can't act like people didn't know what was going on with Hillary Clinton's emails. Obviously there was something to be shown. And now I will say this, I'm the first to say this, the FBI said that there's going to be no charges against her. So a lot of folks will say, well, that means that she should be absolutely acquitted of it. We need to put this to bed. But we know that other people have been charged with the same things, or the evidence to put other people into a position of penalty have been doing the same exact things that she was doing, and she's going to get none of it. So there's at least a double standard being shown, but it shows that many people were at least in the know of what was going on, if not supporting it. Going back into the article, the FBI found that, quote, hostile actors, or foreign hackers you could call them, gained access to private email accounts of people with whom Clinton was in regular contact with through her personal account, and that she used her personal email overseas in, quote, the territory of sophisticated adversaries, which would be Russia and China, and it's not far-fetched to think that her system may have been compromised. Robert M. Gates, a former defense secretary and CIA director, said just as much, noting that the Pentagon had acknowledged that they get hacked about 100,000 times a day, or at least there's an attempt to. Gates assessed that the odds are pretty high that the Russians, Chinese, or Iranians had compromised Clinton's server. But as FBI Director James B. Comey stated in his news briefing, people who have engaged in similar activities have been subject to security and administrative sanctions. So at least there's been something put on these people that are basically going willy-nilly with their own personal accounts. I don't think people have even been on the scale of Hillary Clinton, where she's developed her own account that people know, her own private server that's exchanging documents that are privately held or high security documents. She's exchanging them on a server that's not vetted by the U.S. government. I mean, that's quite a big offense. The FBI eventually found some smoking guns, but they just didn't want to be the sheriff. Access gained through her email by way of overseas contacts of hers. That's proof. This is beyond special treatment. It's avoidance. The FBI basically came down and said there's not going to be anything going on from this point forward, despite what the evidence shows. And I know there's a lot of people that may want to call in, and if you can, please do, 616-656-1680. That would say I'm kind of being a right-wing harbinger at this point. But I will tell you, Hillary Clinton was doing some illegal, shady things with her email accounts, and we all know she was. And if our best excuse for her doing it is, well, we know other people in government that have done it too, I would say that's a pretty weak argument. I don't think that holds much water. And if it does, it's taking on water every minute. You can't say that everybody's wrong so we can all be wrong together. You know, like, let's hold hands when we jump off the bridge, shall we? I think it's just crazy. I think we have proof that shows that she was at least negligent. And, you know, I don't have any wide-ranging things that I want to happen to Hillary Clinton because she was negligent. You know, I'm not in the know, or I'm not in the feeling of she needs to denounce her presidency. But there needs to be some sort of sanctions. It's an absolute hit on someone's credibility. That's for sure. And whether we like a man like Donald Trump or not, he's not wrong to be picking on Hillary Clinton. He's not wrong to be picking on Hillary Clinton in this sense. There's not even a question. She was doing something with those emails, and at least being negligent, we know that. There's also another article, this is from MSN.com, that says, with the FBI probe over, the state opens up a new investigation of Clinton's email. And this is by Hannah Allen. The State Department announced late Thursday that it was launching its own internal review of Hillary Clinton's email practices while she was the nation's top diplomat. The department's inspector general had already conducted an investigation and found that the series did have some lapses in Clinton's use of private server and email access during her tenure as Secretary of State. But an administrative review into Clinton and her staff's handling of classified information has been put out on hold at the request of the Justice Department so as to not interfere with the other investigations. Now that the FBI has announced its findings, the State Department's internal review can begin. So basically, we're just opening another chapter in the book of Hillary Clinton's bullcrap email stuff. It ends with the FBI and it starts with the state opening it up all over again. And that's not because it's a witch hunt. It's because they're struggling between doing something about somebody being obviously in the wrong who's in a high position of power. That's why there's a struggle here. That's why it's going around in circles. That's why people are fighting about it in this way, is because there's some evidence there and people don't know what to do with it. Do we completely get rid of it? Would I be wrong if I kicked the can on this one? That sort of thing. And I don't think it's very conspiratorial to think that when there's a little meeting between one of the heads of the Department of Justice and Hillary Clinton's husband on this plane, I don't think that they were talking about their grandchildren and the weather. I just don't believe it. I think that Bill Clinton exercised some rights and powers that he has from being a former president, walked in there, and they had a discussion that no other human being other than an ex-president could have with a Department of Justice official. I think that's what happened. Now, I don't think it's a right-wing conspiracy theory to assume that politicians play nice with the people they like and play dirty with the people they don't like, and we know that Loretta Lynch likes the Clintons. And it's not being a right-wing hobnob to say such a thing. I just don't believe it. But Hillary Clinton's email access and her email problems, far from over. If you guys want to talk about this or tell me that I'm a complete jack and wrong about everything I've just said, call in 616-656-1680. But that's essentially the thing. What do you do when the FBI does an investigation and they're supposed to be the hammer and they don't want to swing it? Where do you go? Because I think that that's exactly what we're looking at here, is a situation where some evidence is presented, and it makes somebody that you're counting on look a little bit negative. So how do you spin that, or what do you do with it? Well, you have backdoor conversations, you make some deals, and you work out a way where they say, yeah, there are some things, but not too bad of things. We're not going to keep going forward with it. Let's just continue with the elections as status quo. And I would say that is the exact problem with our system in the first place. It's the exact reason why people are sick of someone like Hillary Clinton. And it's the exact reason why she's damn lucky that Donald Trump is the one running against her. Because if it wasn't him, she could possibly get beat. Hillary Clinton is not a clean character. She's a woman who represents the late 1990s neoliberal advancement into how Democrats oversaw things like globalist agendas. And I'm not, no Alex Jones here, but Democrats are in on this game of the military-industrial complex too. They're totally in on this game. They play ball. And she plays ball. And they play ball with big banks. And we know that. We said it last week. Last week's show, Obama, his number one reporter, Goldman Sachs. Mitt Romney's number two, Goldman Sachs. So the game is tilted. It's rigged. And Clinton plays that exact game. She's no different. And that's why people, when they say, go jump onto the Hillary Clinton plane, there's a problem there. There's an ethical problem there. There's a moral problem there for people. It's not her in general. It's not her demeanor, and it's not her gender. There's moral and ethical issues that people have had with her for quite a long time, and they didn't go away. They've been enhanced with Donald Trump, but they were there before Donald Trump. And this email thing is not making it any better. It's not going to make it any better for Hillary Clinton's arguments. But I will say this. I don't think it's the greatest of offensives either. I don't think that, she needs to be tarred and feathered. I don't think that we need to arrest her and remove her of her titles or something like that, or something absolutely futile. I think that's crazy too. But we need to have some sort of thing where we say, should we question Hillary Clinton's availability of documents? Absolutely. Absolutely we should. Should she have been Secretary of State? Definitely not. Not with the way she handled her own documents on her own private server. No, sir. She was violating some serious codes of ethics right there when she did it, when she decided to move it over. That's because, just for people that aren't as tech savvy, there's reasonings for this. And why is this a big deal? We can get into that for a minute. Why is it a big deal to have it on your private server? Well, if you're on a government server, that falls under a lot of the laws and regulations of the federal government, plus you have the advantage of the government defending that server for you. They have people that are counter hackers, counter hacktivists that work on your behalf to secure your server and make sure everything is in the know. And also, if needed, they can review all those documents. They have the archives. They have the access to the documents, and you don't. They can retrieve them from you. In a way, you're borrowing the server from them. When you have your own server, you can move the documents through as you please, and when they want them back, they don't have direct access, which is why when Clinton did her email dump, that was such a big deal. She had a bunch of documents that the federal government didn't have direct access to, and she was able to manipulate it first before she handed it over to them. And that's essentially what it was. Think about it like documents. Instead of having the documents at the state house, she has them in her linen closet in the bathroom. And that's where she keeps them. And when they said they want them back, she gets to file through them and hand them back as she pleases, instead of the government having them all along. That's essentially exactly what happened with Hillary Clinton's email servers. So, again, an ethics issue, yes, absolute ethics issue. We saw it. But in a presidential race like this, does it negate her from her presidency? Not compared to what we got. As sad as that is, it doesn't. I don't think it does negate her from her presidency in any way. I think it could, if she was running against somebody else, this would be a major implication. This is going to be a sideshow. We're going to be worried about Donald Trump and how misogynistic he is in 2 months. This whole thing, it'll be gone in a blink of an eye. The fact that I'm talking about it now, people are going to think is a little bit overrated. They'll think it's over. And I know she won't be indicted. I know nothing's going to happen. I'm not denying that. I don't believe that everything would be rosy and green if she did get indicted. But I think that there's serious issues with the way that she conducted herself and the way that they suppress staff within the know about the email servers. That has more to do it, because it's one thing to have the crime committed. It's another thing to happen upon the crime and cover it up. And it's another thing to facilitate the crime and then cover it up. It's an issue that we should all think about when we're talking about someone who's going to be handling some of the biggest secrets in our nation. Now, I don't think that she's, like, in my mind, I have some drawing of her handing documents to, the Chinese government. No, that's not what's happening. But being reckless and having people gain advantage from that can certainly happen. Oh, we have a caller on the line, but we're going to be picking him up after the break here, because it's JB, Jeremiah Bannister, who's going to be calling in, giving us an update about Samantha and Team Tiny Dancer. And it's going to be great. Please stick around. After that, we're going to be talking about Ken Ham's unfloatable, unfactual arc. So it's going to be fun. But before that, like we said, Jeremiah, Team Tiny Dancer, stick around. We'll be right back.
Now back to Joe and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to Paleo Radio, here live in studio, 95.3 FM, 1680 AM Public Reality Radio. We've got a very special guest, our good friend, colleague, co-host of Paleo Radio, Jeremiah Bannister. How are you doing?
I'm the Duke of Schwank, and I'm doing absolutely fantastic.
The Duke of Schwank. Lord Earl of Schwanktown.
As always, dude, the one and only, for sure, no doubt, 100%.
Yeah. So, hey, give us an update on Sammy. How's she doing, or what's life been like on your edge of the pond?
Well, I was on the show last Saturday, and for people who are unfamiliar with the story, I encourage them, go check it out, Spreaker.com/Paleo Radio Show. I believe it's episodes number 38 and 37. Both have these updates. This will be the third installment of this. And we talked on Saturday, and Saturday morning was a rough one for me. That's when I found out that her radiation was going to be pushed from Sunday until Friday. That's also the day when we woke up and she was no longer able to control her bowels. She is now incontinent. And so that was a very frightening day for me. But the 2 days that followed are undoubtedly the scariest days of my entire life, that Sunday and that Monday. Sunday night, at around, I would say it's probably around 12:30 at night. Let me actually backtrack. During the day, on Sunday, we woke up and she vomited, which that's been happening more frequently over the past couple weeks, and so we said, okay, and she was also using the bathroom, unable to really recognize the need to get up, to have that impulse and spontaneity that says you have to get up, you have to go. And so that had been happening, but we noticed that she was just so weak. And in fact, she was pale. Her body was just white as, could be. And we went out, we met with our caregiver in Rockford, and after that, we were all very hungry, and we decided to go out to eat. And we figured she'd be okay, but as we're walking from the parking lot to the restaurant, I noticed, I said, I don't feel comfortable anymore with her even walking, because her leg was so weak and so uncoordinated that it would just it would drop down, it would dip really low to the ground. And we both my wife and I had to hold on to her. It's no longer really something that one person should really be doing. And so I looked at Angela, my wife, and I said, I think from now on we need to just use her chair. And that decision was made that day. So we go into the restaurant. It's the corner bar, actually. It's kind of a historical monument there in Rockford. Beautiful place.
Yeah.
And we go in, and there's a bunch of people, and she sits down next to me at the edge of the booth, looking very tired. And I asked if she was okay, and she said, yeah. And I said, do you feel like you've got to puke or anything? And she said, no. So I reached over, and I grabbed the menu, and as soon as I turned back around, within 5 seconds, my wife is shouting, oh, my gosh, she's going to puke. And she grabs her and turns her to the side, and she vomits on the floor in the middle of this restaurant. And I felt badly for a minute. There was a family next to us, and it was a teenage guy, and he's facing us, and he saw it. I thought he was going to puke, actually. His face was really pretty sick from seeing it. And part of me felt for, I don't know, maybe half of a second that maybe I should apologize. I said, no, not doing that. No. I'm like, sorry, bro, it's called life.
Yes, yeah.
You don't know what we're dealing with, champ.
Yes.
But I did feel badly. I mean, there's a part of me that says nobody wants that when they go to a restaurant. So we respectfully said, let's get her out of here. We ordered some food, but she wasn't eating. And it's just a complete disinterest. And a couple times where she took a couple bites of things, she would puke those things up. And so we realized that she hadn't actually eaten anything in at least 48 hours, almost 60 hours. And that was worrisome, and she was sleeping most of the day. I mean, when we went into this restaurant, that was during about an hour and a half window where she was actually awake. Not very talkative, a lot of yes and no's, a lot of kind of this disinterest in what was going on around her, distance, and stuff in her eyes. And so went back home, and she fell asleep. And at about 12:30 that night, okay, getting back to where I began here, at 12:30 at night, she started exhibiting these signs of like a very high sense of being alert, right? And her eyes were they were so cranked out looking, very big. Her pupils were huge, and she was wide awake. And then she started to shake. And she started to have symptoms that are similar to what is called, and I hope I'm pronouncing it properly, dystonia. And dystonia is, if people go online, dystonia, I'm pretty sure it's how it's spelled, you'll see something similar to what happens with her. And it's involuntary movements, a lot of jerking around. She was patting, like doing a high five with my wife, and I've never seen somebody do so many high fives in a short period of time. It was like so much energy, so much speed in her body, and she was super alert and talking. Actually, it was the first time in maybe a week and a half that she'd actually engaged in back and forth dialogue with us,
and
she
you were
was
saying
lucid.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to ask so people can understand the reasoning why Sammy's been having a hard time having conversations and articulating is because of the area of her brain that's being affected by the cancer, right?
Right. She has it. She has cancer in her thalamus, the cerebellum, and pretty close to the frontal lobe. It's bumping up against it, and so it's exhibiting many different kinds of symptoms, whether it's the loss of short-term memory, the lack of desire to do anything. It's kind of the lethargy that comes along with this. The disconnect between the sensations that your body naturally has, like, for example, going to the bathroom or needing to eat, and the decision-making process that says, okay, I got to go to the fridge and get food, or I need to get up and go to the bathroom or tell my parents that I have to do this. That there's a disconnect there. And so there was kind of a constellation of symptoms, and that these symptoms began cascading. And so she started having these shakes, and it was so bad, her whole body, her arms and her legs, but it was confusing because she was moving her right arm, and for people who aren't aware, when she was first diagnosed with cancer, it was in her thalamus, and it was blocking the ventricle in her brain, one of the ventricles in her brain that allowed the fluid to get down so that it could communicate to her right side. So she looked like a stroke victim, somebody who had a stroke. Her right leg was not moving, her right arm was not moving, and over the last year and a half, through therapy, she was able to move her arm and to walk again. But she needs a brace, and her arm has very limited mobility. She can move her thumb a little bit, and every once in a while she can kind of wiggle her pinky. But other than that, she has very limited mobility in that arm. And so that night, when all of this was happening, she was moving her arm in ways that I haven't seen her move her arm since before her biopsy, even before her brain surgery itself.
Yeah.
And I said, can you put your hand in the air? And make a fist and put it up, kind of like the Black Panther fist in the sky at the Olympics, that kind of a movement. And I said, can you do that? And she did it with ease. And it wasn't done in phases. It wasn't done like in the steps that she normally does, where she kind of has to, with a great deal of effort, get her elbow up to her shoulder, and then kind of just barely move it so that her fist is a little bit above her head and then fall back down. I mean, it went straight up. And I'm looking at her, and I'm thinking, holy moly, what is this?
Yeah.
And I said, can you put it down? And she did. And about 10 seconds later, I said, can you do this again? And I had her do it 3 times. And then I had her use her leg, and I said, push against me with your leg, and with her right leg, the weak one. And I used my whole body weight. I put it up against my chest, and I was using my whole body weight, and she's pushing me over like it was nothing. And I knew at that point, I said, it's so deceptive, because on the one hand, people could see that and be like, oh my gosh, look what she's able to do. On the other hand, it was happening because of a serious dilemma.
Yeah.
And that the electricity in the brain was just firing at such a rapid pace that it was literally giving her this kind of strength and force that she is not, it's not necessarily normal. It's not customary for her or for kids her age. And so I said, this is a precarious place to be. This is a strange experience. But then she would fall asleep. And as soon as the shaking would subside, she would immediately kind of float off in her eyes to a distant place, and then she'd fall asleep. And then it was back to that world of not being able to get her to respond. And she yo-yoed like that, back and forth. And she did that for a while. So now we get here. This went on for about a day, and then she went into the sleep where she wasn't waking up. She wasn't responding. And when she did, she would simply respond with these very, very subtle nods of the head. She wouldn't be able to open her eyes. She could not move. Hospice was afraid. We had conversations this past week about resuscitation. What are her wishes and our wishes if she needs to be resuscitated? What happens if she's in a coma? These are conversations that have been forced upon us in the last week. So out of a great deal of fear and dread, we called the family and we said, we cannot promise. And hospice said the same thing, so did the doctors, that we could not promise that she'd make it till Friday. Mm-hmm. And so we called them and let them know that if they want to be here, it might be a good time to be here. But then we said, no, we need to go to Beaumont. This is the place that we need to get radiation therapy. We need this to extend her life so that we can look for more options, that we can look for different chemos or trials. And maybe even hold out that there can be cures. And people are already advancing cures with different kinds of cancer in ways that are mind-boggling. How much longer must it be for this? And so even just to have that time, and so I carried her. And there's a picture, actually, on Facebook I posted, which is one of the last things Sammy said to me that was a cogent, where she was lucid and having a conversation where she said, "Don't stop fighting for me, Papa." And so that day, I said, we're going to Beaumont. This is Beaumont or bust. And I was hyper-focused. I was terrified. I don't know if I said hardly a word in the car, and I drove for 2.5 hours and carried her, and Angela got a picture of me getting her out of the car and putting her into her wheelchair. And we got into the hospital. They immediately did an MRI, put her on a hefty dose of steroids. It's taken the swelling down dramatically, the steroids have. And the MRI result indicated that there's been no growth at all since we last found out last month.
That's some good news.
That's fantastic.
That's great news.
Yeah. Oh, believe me.
Yes.
Believe me, bro. And so
yes.
But the swelling was causing the problems and the inflammation. And so they put her on the steroids, but it didn't stop the shakes. And the shakes went on all day long. And so for 4 days, and this is catching you up to now, for 4 days, she has been, throughout the day, she will wake up when she's shaking. I bet you have 80% of her day that she's awake, she's experiencing those shakes. And when those shakes are done, she falls back asleep. And so you might have sleep for 15 minutes to 45 minutes, then she's back awake again for an hour, then asleep for 15 minutes to 45 minutes, then awake for an hour. So she's not even getting a sleep cycle in. That is, and it's after days, it's causing even delusions where, or hallucinations where she said she was eating jelly beans, and there were no jelly beans. And that was a sad thing, and we rolled with it. Mm-hmm. You don't make fun of someone in that place. You don't even necessarily correct them.
Mm-hmm.
You roll with what's going on. And so we asked where she got them. She got them from her friend at school. And I asked if they were delicious, and she assured me that they were. And so I smiled and enjoyed that time with her. But she was going back and forth, and when she would be sleeping, her lowest heart rate so far was 41. And it spent a lot of time in the 40s, and this is about 2 nights ago. And the highest that her heart rate has been, and her highest is only when she has those episodes. That's the only time that her heart rate spikes at all. But it's been yesterday, the highest was 185, and the day before it was 199.
Wow.
And so seeing those lights beeping rapidly and all the noises screaming out to the nurses in the halls, there's a problem in this room, it's been hard.
Yeah.
But we're seeing great things. We're seeing her be awake a lot more. We're seeing her eat by herself. It's the first time in like a week that she's actually fed herself. That's happened. She's communicating more while she's awake. And then last night, they decided to try giving her a small dose of Ativan with the idea that if nothing else, it would help the panic so that her heart doesn't spike up into the 180s and 190s. And what it did was it calmed her down enough that she literally slept for the first time in a week, or since we've been here, where she had a full night's sleep with only one interruption, and it was when she actually needed her dose again. So it was predictable.
That's great.
So she's doing good.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 1 more minute here. You want to give everybody, let them know about Teen Tiny Dancer, the GoFundMe, what people can do to help. And again, I just want to add the caveat before you get into it, JB, that, hey, anybody, if you can't donate financially, words of encouragement, thoughts, prayers, if that's what you like to do, if that's kind of the cat's pajamas for you, whatever works, please send it towards the banisters.
Well, I'll just say this in the last minute, is that I want to thank every single person right? I've been so overwhelmed with people who've made videos talking about what Samantha's done in their lives. People making pictures and memes. Melanie Rice made one recently, and Kristen Sharpley made one recently. Just beautiful memes that they're sharing, and people are sharing those. And people using the hashtag. In fact, so many people were using the hashtag and looking it up, hashtag Team Tiny Dancer, that Facebook recognized it as a popular search. And so we're just so grateful for everybody. And, of course, you can go to GoFundMe.com/Team Tiny Dancer. You can also, if you don't like GoFundMe, you can do it via PayPal by going through aleebannister@gmail.com. There's also 5 for Fighting. There's a whole bunch of things, and you can find out all of this by looking up the hashtag on Facebook. Go into the search bar, look up hashtag Team Tiny Dancer, and you're going to see a lot of stuff. And again, I just thank everybody for their support. It means the world to us, and we're just so grateful for the army of people that have surrounded our family during this time.
Yeah. And, well, thank you for contributing, man. Thank you for calling in, and we love you, buddy. Hang in there, man. We know how it's going, but you've got an army of people behind you rooting for you, rooting for Sammy. We love you, man.
All right. Love you, too. All right. Thank you.
All right. Up next, Ken Ham and his ARC. It's going to be fantastical. Stick around.
For debates, interviews, or speeches, contact Paleo Radio Show at gmail.com.
It's getting heavy.
You love to hate 'em, you hate to love 'em. You just can't get enough of 'em, you sick freaks. Paleo Radio's on the air.
We're back live, Paleo Radio, here on 95.3 FM, 1680 AM Public Reality Radio. Joe Elder here manning the station. Segment 4, Ken Ham's non-floatable, non-factual ARC exhibit opens. This is really fun. We actually have a clip that kind of does a lead into it. We'll jump right in.
Of this size, of this quality, that competes with the Disneys and the Universals, to give a message to the world.
President and CEO of Answers in Genesis and the Ark Encounter, Ken Ham, spoke to the crowd about his vision for the Ark. Over the next 10 years, he expects it'll have an economic impact of $4 billion and bring in 20,000 jobs to Kentucky.
I think we're going to see more people here than we ever dreamed possible.
Ham expects 2 million people to visit the attraction every year.
This is not okay.
Some people, though, aren't very happy about the building of the Ark. President of Tri-State Freethinkers, Jim Helton, claims it's anti-science, immoral, and anti-LGBT.
This is very, very dangerous. They're telling the people the Earth is only 6,000 years old, not billions of years, and they're denying evolution.
Despite the controversy, Ken Ham says he's hopeful this will spread the Christian message around the world.
It doesn't matter whether people agree with our biblical stand or not. As a Christian ministry, even non-Christians are fascinated by this. They want to come and see Noah's Ark.
The Tri-State Freethinkers say they'll protest outside the park on Thursday, July 7th. That's when the park will open. And something interesting to note here for that July 7th date, they decided to open it up on that day because in Genesis chapter 7, verse 7, is when Noah's family boarded the ark. We're live in Williamstown. I'm TJ Parker, 9 on your side.
All right, so that was Ken Ham. I don't know if you could hear the start of the clip, but he said something that was very interesting to me. He said, it's about time that Christians got around to having something, a park of this stature that's to the relevance of Disney World or Universal Studios. And to that, I would say that's really a good thing that at least he's likening his park to fictional places like Disney and Universal, so I can take a little bit of solace in that. But an article that I wanted to share with you guys is from ScienceWorldReport.com. It's the science guy Bill Nye visits Ken Ham's newly opened Ark Encounter, which he did, and this is by Elaine Hanna. And we'll do a little recap of Ken Ham, but also this is a man who had a debate with Bill Nye a couple years back that garnished a lot of attention, and even to this day they have kind of a quasi, they have a very good relationship, a working relationship together, but it's at an arm's length. So going into the article. Ken Ham is the founder and chief executive officer of the Young Earth Creationist Ministry in Answers in Genesis, and Bill Nye is a science educator who hosted the 1990s television series Bill Nye the Science Guy. The debate was viewed by approximately 3 million people, and according to a Christian public relations firm, they said that they are saying that Ham believes that Earth was created approximately 6,000 years ago and that dinosaurs and humans once coexisted. And this is what we see in his Ark exhibit. In contrast, Nye defends the scientific consensus that Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old, and the existence of dinosaurs and humans is separated by about 60 million years, which is not just guesswork. We're talking geological, factual evidence here, folks. But in the previous debate, the one before this Ark was constructed, Bill Nye said, and he had argued that the boat constructed based on the parameters given for Noah's Ark in the book of Genesis would not float. He calculated that if there were 7,000 kinds of animals on the Ark on average, which is a word that they've made up where they said kinds, because you have to know that biblical references and scientific references are separated by almost 1,600 years. So the idea that somebody would be talking about speciation in the time of Noah is ridiculous. So what they said back in the day is kinds, as in a different kind of animal, like a mouse to a donkey. Those are two different kinds of animals. And so it's very lowbrow, not the same thing. But there's a big point that Ken Ham and his constituency defends. But they basically, from this calculation, Nye says that 7,000 kinds of animals on the Ark, on average, 11 species would have to come into existence each day for the Earth to contain the amount of animals that are presently in existence. So per Ham's logic, we'd have to have 11 species that are popping into existence every single day just to get the amount of life that we have here if it was all preserved on the Ark. So naturally, it's just a bogus argument. One of my favorites, just so we can think about this, folks, is think about an animal like a sloth, okay? Sloths are in South America. They're not in many areas of the world. For a sloth to even get to the Ark is like a time frame of over a sloth's lifespan. They'd have to be having babies and procreating on the distance and on the travel. It'd be like the Oregon Trail for sloths to get to the Middle East to get into this boat when it floated up and it killed everything else. I mean, think about that. The Oregon Trail for sloths. So just something to put into your mind about it. But I had a few things that I wrote down about this exact thing that I wanted to share with you guys. This is unacceptable. It's unacceptable on educational grounds. You can't be using state funding to promote unintellectual realms of society to benefit themselves from their own ignorance. This is already permitted in most local churches, and they can do that and be part of that as well. They do not need a park. So basically what I'm saying is Ken Ham accepted state funding to get this Ark project accepted. He also makes people take oaths if you're a Christian or not, so you can work there. So we have a separation of church and state issue offhand. But the biggest thing I have is the biggest one, and maybe this is me being kind of the bleeding heart, but the natural world is so wonderful as it is. Why not let the evidence take us where it takes us? If our genetic tests show that we're indeed great apes, then why not try to adapt to that evidence? It's a wonderful thing to know our true origins. Does it degrade humanity to know that we have much more humble beginnings? I don't think so. I think it's an amazing underdog story. A story from bottom up, not top down. Let's celebrate that fact that we have humble origins. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Paleo Radio, exclusively with Secular Media Group.